Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you. It's an honor to be up on stage again this year. Enjoyed being with you last year. Dr. Mesa, welcome to you and Chris in San Antonio. I know everybody here is welcoming you to the city. You very eloquently stole half of my lines with your introduction, so I'm going to have to wing it, but that's okay. Actually, we'll dispense with the long introductions. All of you know Dr. William Henrich. You know he's a specialist in kidney diseases. You know he's the president of UT Health San Antonio, a position he's held since 2009. And how many read the wonderful article by Wendy Atwell that's on our site this morning? You really get a sense of how accomplished he is professionally. That's not what we're here to talk about today. We're not here to talk about William Henrich, physician and president. We're here to talk about your friend and mine, Bill, who's a patient, and the father-son story we're about to hear, which is a very compelling one, and one with more resonance than just about the Henrich family. I said father-son, but it very much involves Mary, Bill's wife, who's in Rhode Island today with her grandkids. John's sister Emily lives in Providence, I think, or Newport, and she's traveling, so Mary couldn't be with us today, but she's very much part of this story, and we'll be sure to include her before the program is over. But we're really here today because Bill is a friend, not just a leader to so many people in the room, and also because we share his passion for the larger mission that he and Dr. Mesa are so engaged in, which is building out and expanding our world-class institutions for medical care and education. So without further ado, let's welcome Bill, Dr. William Henrich, to the stage. You're right here on the hot seat. Okay. And we are joined also by his son, John, who is a corporate attorney in Dallas. John, welcome home. We're glad to have you back in San Antonio. Come up. You're over here.
Oh, okay.
Everybody mic'd? Everybody okay? So let's please sit down. So we are here to hear this wonderful, compelling narrative, this father-son story, but I think there's some larger themes here, as Dr. Mesa said, not only about Dr. Henrich's ability to come back to work and continue to pursue his larger mission, but also I've been struck as I've talked to both of these gentlemen about their experience, and you'll hear more about this, how important it is for all families to anticipate the eventuality of disease striking in their family and whether we're all ready for that. Not only the person who's afflicted with the disease, but everyone around him. And I think we spend more time worrying about whether we have a will in our estate, but we really don't talk very much about what happens to a family when somebody does get cancer. And I think we're going to find out a little bit more about that today, and maybe all of you will leave this afternoon with a better sense of maybe conversations you should be having at your own home with your own family. So Dr. Henrich, let me start with you. You're one of the fittest, most disciplined community leaders I've met in my time here in San Antonio, and pride yourself on that, I know, and a very youthful guy. But something happened one day where you got a diagnosis and found out that all that good living didn't matter. Why don't you start at the beginning? And
Yeah, we'll talk about irritating. Yeah, I took very good care of myself. I exercised 10 times a week. I watched what I ate, and I hadn't smoked or had any other moderately dangerous behaviors. And I went for a routine blood test because I was doing what each of us should do, which is to go see the doctor annually. And the blood test showed I had a low white count. Over the course of about the next 14 or 15 months, it became clear that something serious was wrong and something I'd always suspected was wrong. I have an innate ability to disasterize every situation.
jump in here, John, anytime.
Yeah, this is true. I would also say that we all had to put up with your exercising 10 times a week. And we had to survive some alarmingly short shorts and a lot of wraps and bandages. So, we all suffered.
Where were we?
So I knew this was not going to be the right thing to do. I just knew this was going to go south. So what happened was I ultimately had to have a bone marrow test done, which is the way to diagnose this disorder, and had myelodysplasia. And to get back to Bob's point, within a matter of seconds, my life was completely changed. I'd gone from being a president of an academic medical center and with all sorts of possibilities in front of me to learning that I had a disease that would likely kill me in 3 years. And I think, in answer to your question, I don't think there's any way to prepare yourself for that series of nanoseconds. People of faith in the room might disagree. They might be better equipped and better prepared than I was. But when it happened to me, I was completely at sea. I was completely lost. I was completely adrift. And that's where I think something we can rely on, if you're fortunate, can help. And that is where my family was helpful. Mary couldn't be here today, but she was a rock of Gibraltar during this entire thing. She saw me on my worst days. She saw me go through this, and she was methodical about one step after the other and encouraging me and not putting up with my whining and my wonderful ability to make a disaster out of every single thing in my life. And she was the port in the storm for me, Bob. So I think family becomes really important. I think perspective becomes important. Dr. Mesa said, and it's true, I think the field in medicine that has moved the most, each of you should know this, that science underlies all of this progress and all of the hope that you have for a better tomorrow depends on science. And in oncology, the field has been moving so rapidly. It's fabulous to see.
I think, Dr. Henrich, that your diagnosis was maybe in late 2011 or early 2012. Mm-hmm. And is it fair to say that if it had been 10 years earlier, the option of pursuing a stem cell transplant might not have been possible?
Probably. I'll tell you what happens. If you need so stem cell transplants, you hear a lot about stem cells, but stem cell transplants for bone marrow disorders have been around for a long time. Actually, the pioneer in the procedure was a Texan, a person who grew up just east of Waco and has a fascinating story, trained in part our new dean, Rob Romas, at the University of Washington. His name was Don Thomas. And by 1990, when he won the Nobel Prize for medicine and physiology, there had been 300 or 400 stem cell centers around the world. In 2012, the year I received John cells, the 1 millionth person to receive a stem cell transplant received a stem cell transplant. And they've been used mostly for leukemias, but also for myelodysplasia. The problem for me was that when I went to have my DNA tested, I had about a 50% chance, based on my heredity, of having a match in the International National Bone Marrow Registry. 15 million people have signed up. I hope all of you will sign up. And I didn't have a match. I was talking with John at lunch just now. One of the most uplifting conversations I had with him was on a Sunday afternoon when I learned I didn't have a match. I was standing in the backyard of our house, and I was just back in the dumps again. I didn't know what was going to happen. And John had done some reading about one haplotype matches so that he could be the donor, 50% from John, 50% from Mary. And here I'm listening to my son who knows absolutely nothing about science.
Now that sounded like a shot.
First of all, that's why we have Wikipedia. And you had not read the Wikipedia entry on this clearly.
He said, I remember it vividly as though it were yesterday. He said, "This is perfect." He said, "This is perfect. This is exactly what you wanted to happen." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, the cells are fresh because they're harvested from me that day. They come from a youthful, energetic, stronger than you person like me. And so this is going to work. This will be a cinch. This is not going to, and I don't know why, John, to this moment. I do not know why, when I hung up the phone, I felt better. Because by all intents, I should have been basically back in the dumps again. But that conversation was an example of an uplifting moment that followed a dark moment for me, and I'll never forget. That's what you said.
Yeah, it's because I'm a lawyer. So. I'm very comfortable talking about things I know nothing about.
I have to attempt to intervene here just briefly. And John, not many of us get a chance to save our dad's lives.
Yeah.
So all joking aside, that must have been a very powerful moment when you realized that the solution wasn't going to be found on a distant database from somebody else somewhere, but it was right there at home, and you had the opportunity to do something for your father that only you and your sister probably could have done.
Yeah, I mean, I remember thinking it wasn't actually that big of a deal for me. Not that it's just not much is really asked of you. You know, it wasn't really a question of would you undergo a bone marrow donation or, you know, what the procedure was. It didn't seem like a hard question. You know, they explained to you what happens, and you know, you get a little sore. I mean, it's not elective, but at the same time, everyone should do it. You should get on the registry, I think. You know, when I think back, like the most frustrating thing about the whole time was like Love Field was undergoing construction, so like getting through security at Love Field was way harder than anything I had to do. Coming down and, you know, coming to Houston and, you know, getting the blood tests and answering their questions and all that stuff. So for me, it was actually pretty easy. You do get pretty sore. I mean, they drill some holes in your back for a while, so it feels like, you know, you fell on your butt for a couple days. But other than that, you know, it was not a question.
Well, the process might be easy, but it's got to be pretty compelling that you have your father here, and you might not have had him here.
Oh, absolutely.
And Dr. Henrich, is it correct to say you're cured, or are you in remission, or what's the correct?
Well, 95% of we have a series of experts in the audience, but about 95% of the relapses occur in the first 2 years following a stem cell transplant. So every year there's probably 0.5% to a 1% chance that the disease will come back. Another interesting thing about this is the personality of the person who took care of me in Houston. To say he was taciturn, and he wasn't unfriendly, but he never smiled. And I called him a few months ago and said, do you want me to come back? And this summer for a routine set of tests, and he said no. He said, don't bother.
That's great. I want to walk this story back a little bit before things look so good, and I see one of our great physician healers, Dr. Francisco Figueroa, is in the audience, and at that time, Cisco, you were the chancellor of the UT system. So, like a lot of people that aren't professionals, Dr. Henrich, my reaction when I heard your bad news was that you would not come back to your position at UT. And in fact, you told me in our conversations about driving up to Austin to see Ken Shine, your boss, and Dr. Figueroa, to give them the news and give them the choice, frankly, of asking you at age 65 with what you faced to step down. And I just want you to share with the audience a little bit about that.
Sure. We had I knew what the diagnosis was, and I knew that to go through a stem cell transplant, I had to be away from work for at least 6 months, and more likely 7 months, because you're in isolation for a lot of that time. And it takes a while for the new cells to engraft and to start working properly. So I went to see Ken Shine, then the Executive Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs at the University of Texas in Austin, and Cisco, who many of you know was the chancellor then, but was the president when I was recruited here to be the dean of the medical school. So we'd known each other as friends and colleagues for quite a while. And I told Ken Shine in that few minutes, I said, you know, Ken, I told him what I had. I told him what I had to go through. And I said, if you want to make a change in the presidency of the Health Science Center, now would be a good time. Because I got to be away. You can think about how you would react to that possibility if you're in Shine's shoes. I've often re-spooled the tape and thought, what would I have said to a person who'd come to me with that kind of news, even somebody who I thought was competent and doing a good job. And it was a blessing in my life that he didn't hesitate. He didn't wait. Bobby didn't wait 2 seconds. He said, get this fixed, come back. It was like he was telling me, go get the tires on the car changed and come back this afternoon. And I thought, what does he know about this that I don't know? And if that's the case, maybe I can survive it. We went upstairs and talked to Cisco, and Cisco said the same thing. I'll always think about that moment, Cisco. You never hesitated. You said, come back, get this fixed, appoint an interim president, come back. And from that moment forward, I had a job I loved that I wanted to come back to. And I had people, Mary believed in me, John believed in me, Emily believed in me, and then I had Cisco and Ken who believed in me and thought I could do it and thought I could come back. And I don't know how I can ever repay that moment for what you said to me that day, because this is all live. This is, you know, live interactions happening at that moment. So that was a blessing, and it propelled me forward to get this done as soon as I could.
Well, thank you, Cisco. So here you are with your diagnosis, and MD Anderson is just down Interstate 10. But I want you to talk a little bit about getting second opinions and what you shared with me, even about medical professionals, not necessarily listening to people that they might be closely associated with or working alongside or in the same city, but why you would go to 1, 2, or even 3 different places to explore options, and why people should think about that, because so many of us are afraid to look our physicians in the eye and say we're going to go get a second opinion. Sure. That's a very hard thing for most of us to do.
It is hard, but it shouldn't be hard. I want everybody, if you take nothing else away from this meeting today, I want you to understand this. Medicine is complicated today, and no matter what the disease, whether it's the most complicated disease to diagnose accurately, like cancer is, the most difficult to treat precisely as cancer is, any chronic disease, kidney disease, heart disease, lung disease, liver disease, when you're facing the specter of something that's not immediately reversible, and you have to plan for weeks or months, maybe even years of therapy, it is my earnest recommendation that you get a second opinion about it. You should do that because it's always valuable to have more information, to have more knowledge, and even if the opinions you receive are slightly conflicting, that's okay. It means that you've learned something and you can reconcile that on further discussion. The last thing you should be worried about is whether or not you'll be considered disloyal by the person who's making your primary diagnosis. That is the last thing that should be on your mind. Because what we're talking about here is your life. We're talking about you. We're not talking about a professional relationship with the first person to see you. I went to Boston and saw the doctors at the Dana-Farber Cancer Center at Harvard Medical School, talked to the people in Seattle at the University of Washington, which is one of the pioneers in stem cell transplant. And I went to Houston. I stayed with MD Anderson because it was closer to home, something I hope we'll get to, and also because I had recruited the doctors in this section of MD Anderson to...
That's leverage.
I had recruited them. In my prior job, I was the chair of medicine at the University of Maryland School of Medicine in Baltimore, and I had recruited them there to join our cancer center in Baltimore. They ended up not coming, but in the course of the recruitment, got to know them. So I felt comfortable talking to them, felt comfortable being on a first-name basis with them. And it turns out having a one haplotype match like I needed after I didn't match on the registry was something that MD Anderson had the most experience with.
And so what came next, I guess, was the decision you kind of moved temporarily to Houston, you and Mary, to undertake that experience, and that involves, for most people, a very great disruption in life. You've got to go get an apartment there. There's financial considerations. You're in a city where it's not home, and you faced a long period of isolation to avoid infection, which we'll get to the infections in a minute, but that's a momentous thing, having to do that, even for someone in your position with all the knowledge that you have and the benefits that you have.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I want everybody in the audience to know, honestly, I had every advantage. I had John, I had Emily, I had Mary, I had a lot of things. I had the means to do this. I had a disability policy. I had a job to come back to because of Cisco and Ken, and I had a group of people with whom I worked with at the Health Science Center whom I loved and loved me back. I had everything going for me, and living in a nice apartment. We were on the 10th floor of the Mosaic Apartments in Houston, overlooking Herman Park, looking north to downtown Houston. It was beautiful, except I wasn't home. And I can't tell you exactly what fuels my passion about this cancer center and this city, which I love, except to say, I don't want anybody ever, ever to have to leave, to be away from home and family when you go through something like this. We have to have the competencies, the expertise, the bench strength to do this in a comprehensive way right here in the 7th largest city in the United States. And as I've come back from this, I have felt an urgency to get this accomplished, and I'm not going to rest until we've got this NCI designated cancer center to be a comprehensive cancer center, and it stands as a beacon for all of the people in San Antonio and beyond San Antonio. And I think we can do it.
So that's the mission. You make a convincing speech. Our city manager, Cheryl Scully, is here, and she'll recall a couple of years ago when you were just starting to plan the 2017 bond, that Dr. Henrich came to City Council and gave a very passionate speech that ended up with several $1 million in bond money coming your way to help further that mission, and that'll be realized in the next few years. And I remember how I thought to myself that day, now I get it. This guy didn't want to just come back to his job. His mission was interrupted, and this is what he's trying to build so that people don't have to leave San Antonio for inpatient cancer care. But the day will come when you may want to leave if it's your choice, but you'll be able to stay here too if that's your choice. That's pretty remarkable.
Can I tell you a funny story?
Sure.
I want to thank each of you for being here today. When I was in Houston, I received hundreds of prayers. I was on everybody's prayer list. I got spiritual gifts. I got books. People sent me books. One of the emails I got, however, was a little off-putting from a former good friend of mine. This guy who I had helped rise through the nephrology ranks, he sent me the following email. This is a direct quote of what the email said. He said, "Dear Bill, I hear you're doing very badly. Please confirm." Whatever you do when you're writing somebody, don't say something like that. And then I got a lot of books. I had a lot of books. I gotten Mindy's permission to say this. One of the more interesting books I got was a detailed story of zombies that Mindy Alderman sent me, and she's right here. Don't send your friends books on zombies. But I seriously, you know.
Maybe the zombies, you know, it's not so bad, you know. Just trying to pick you up.
Through all this, Dr. Henrich, Mary was not only your backbone, but she, for many people in this room, was blogging about all this.
She was. She wrote a very funny blog. I would try to get her to edit it. Those of you who know Mary and love Mary know that that wasn't successful. I tried my best, but she wrote just enough to keep people aware of the fact that I was still alive, but that you know, things were progressing pretty well, and she made light of many of the day-to-day things. But honestly, to those of you who've cared for somebody who goes through a long illness, kudos to you. She washed the sheets twice a day. She slept, when I was in isolation, she slept on a hard pallet in the windowsill, the window bench of the hospital for 40 days. She put me in a wheelchair when I couldn't walk. She just wouldn't let me go. She wouldn't let me go. During one of my darkest periods, I dressed in a uniform that was somewhat depressing. It was a baggy sweatpants and a hoodie that John had given me, and I kept the hood over my head to keep my head warm. And Emily, our daughter, came to visit us, and she said, "Dad, you look exactly like the Unabomber."
You know, it's said that physicians actually make lousy patients. I just mentioned that as an aside. And Mary couldn't be here, but I did take the liberty of calling her and getting those blogs, and I'd like to just read a
Oh no,
excerpt.
Oh no.
You knew what you were getting into when you invited me. So here's Mary. The last time Bill and I moved to Houston was 43 years ago, immediately following our wedding. Our great two-bedroom apartment on North Boulevard costs $110 a month. Those apartments must all be taken now. We have an apartment in a high-rise near MD Anderson that's populated mostly by 20-year-olds. This is going to be interesting. Recovering from the two infections was a nightmare. Bill described the feeling as being like the worst flu he had ever had, only to the 10th power. His dalliance with narcotics ended when he failed the cognition tests, and he personally refused all sedating medications thereafter. He braved it through the very tough last 5 days of the septicity, free of all comfort medications. Bill was completely drained of energy when the infections were finally vanquished. The first 10-minute shower he managed after the infection took more than 45 minutes, and he reported that it required more effort than the day he climbed Mount Rainier. The most dire consequence of Bill's hospital release has been my promotion to chief nurse. This charade is complicated because in the hospital, we saw great nurses up close and personal, and I am definitely not a natural in this role. Oh, I start out each morning with best intentions. I'm all Mother Teresa. But by midday, I begin the short conversion to a pretty passable impression of the Incredible Hulk. Bill compensates for my schizophrenia by being a compliant patient, a very tough task for a physician. All in all, we are pretty well matched and we're stumbling through. Bill knows where he wants to go, and he has a good idea of how we will get there together. Thank you all for your emails, messages, cards, gifts, and phone calls, even though most go unanswered. We are receiving them, and I'm relaying all of them to Bill. Your prayers are embossed upon our hearts. That's pretty good. I have a soft spot for bloggers. So, John, what was it like going through that period of the process with your father? You had already given your bone marrow to him. That had been successful. Everything came off great. You were back home and recovered.
Yeah.
I assume you and Emily were in and out of Houston and visiting both of your parents there while they lived there.
Yeah, I would say that the harder part about it, well, I mean, you know, they're in the thick of it, and so as soon as you leave, you're not in the thick of it in the same way. And so time kind of happened differently, I would say, for me. But I spent more time talking to my mom than my dad then. And I mean, you know, she was definitely trying really hard and, you know, worried all the time. So, you know, he wasn't as worried. You know, he's worried about himself. That's a different kind of worry. So just keeping her spirits up and, you know, keeping her, you know, focus was really, you know, that's what I spent most of my time doing. We visited a couple times, but, you know, over the course of 40 days, I mean, it's actually not that many visits that you can do. So, yeah, I would say I talked to my mom the most. And, you know, it wasn't great, but he was getting better pretty much every day. I mean, I know we had a couple of infection bouts there, but the science really did work. Like, they told us what was going to happen, and, you know, it might have not happened on the, like, 5-minute intervals that you maybe wanted it to, but it happened on a daily basis pretty significantly. You know, this will happen by this day, and by this week you'll start seeing this. And if you looked at the results, it really is amazing how on track everything was. So if, you know, you can get lost in the hour by hour, but if you took a step back and looked at it on a week by week basis, it really was amazing. So,
well, I know we have a couple of microphones, a couple of people that are going to be wandering the audience with microphones, and I'd love to hear from some of you. And I know both Dr. Henrich and John would like to take some questions too. So, can I see who's where? And just raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question and maybe introduce yourself. And Dr. Henrich, I'll ask you while we're waiting for people to get over their acute shyness and work their nerve up here to ask a question. What was it like going back to work? How did that unfold, and how long had you been gone, and were you really able to just jump back in?
I was, at least depends on who you ask that question, I suppose, but for me it was thrilling to come back to work and to see my friends and have the chance to roll up my sleeves and work again with them in the service of San Antonio, in the service of our patients and our students, our staff. So for me, it was jumping back in the pool. And, you know, I found something else interesting, is some of the intractable problems that I had left for my successor to fix had been patient and waited for me to get back. So I wasn't alone. It wasn't like I was abandoned and I had a whole series of new things to do. I do want to emphasize, though, I did feel the urgency, and I still feel it today as much, to make as much progress. I think one thing that is apparent to you from all of you value your lives and know how fragile life is. And as a physician, I have appreciated that. Today I understand it much more deeply than I ever have before. So I want to make every day, every moment, every nanosecond count in the progress of making people get better. And I feel a real connection to everyone who is having some sort of a challenge. So jumped right back in, and I work with fantastic people, and privilege of my life is to have the job, and the second privilege is to be able to come back to it.
And really remarkable things have been developing with the Mays Cancer Clinic since you did come back. It's
yes, with Lowry and Peggy and Kathy, and they're all the Mays family have been so generous. They're such pillars of this community, such exemplars. And it turns out it's needed because without their help, without their support, without their reinvestment in our city, in the institutions in our city, then our city stays at a certain level, because you need people to reinvest, to invigorate it and lead it to new heights, and that's what they've done.
all right. We have time for a question or two. Yes, can we? And we'll come right back to you afterwards.
Okay, Bill, we all know you're a workaholic, and we know that that is your passion and drive, but as a mental health professional, I'm questioning, how did you keep your spirits up when you were in your fatalistic mode and your mindset? What did you do to keep going and keep focusing on light?
I did a terrible job of it. I stayed way too focused on the negative. I had an epiphany one day. Maybe this will help what happened. My problem was, my attitude was, I didn't think it was going to work. Fundamentally, I thought that I just didn't trust it enough, because it was in this study and so forth. And so those of you who know anything about cancer patients, you have to have what's called a port put in underneath your collarbone, and that port is used to give you these drugs and fluids. And one of the things you receive when you're in this business is you have to get a lot of magnesium salts, which clog the port. And one day, my port was clogged for the 50th time, and I had to go to this one service to get it unclogged, and it was the end of the day. It was 7 o'clock at night. I was exhausted. I was in despair, and there was this nurse who was going to do this for me, and he was this big guy with a deep bass voice. And he said, "You look a little down today." And I said, "Yeah, my white count is 0. I'm anemic. I have no platelets, so if I sneeze, I'm going to have a cerebral hemorrhage and die on the spot."
You figured it all out.
I can't get, this is the disaster in me, He said, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "You look better than most people at this stage of this." He said, "You know what? You're going to be fine." This nurse said that to me. I can't tell you. I can't convey how much better I felt. Each of you should remember this. Just putting your hand on somebody's shoulder and saying, "This is going to be okay. We got this." Do it. Don't miss the chance to do that. So I came out of it, and I tried to keep even. I have to say, Mary was the leading light in this regard. When I could start exercising again, when I could walk up and down the street and go on walks through the park, that was a big step for me. That helped me.
Terrific. We have another question back here. Ma'am?
Dr. Henrich, the pace and the caliber of the recruiting toward the vision has been phenomenal. And I know people have their own reasons, but how do you describe why people should come here and what makes them say yes to the offer to come to this institution?
The main reason is because of the untapped opportunity we have here, and the fact that the institution has reached a level where it can recruit and retain the very best in the world to come to San Antonio. When Cisco and I first met each other 10 years ago, we had to build a practice. We had to build the educational programs in more directions. We had a lot on the agenda to get accomplished, and thanks to him and thanks to the faculty and thanks to the teams I work with, we've elevated the institution now where it's an attractive place for people like Rob Aromas, for Ruben Mesa, for Sudha Seshadri, who's leading the Alzheimer's Center, for Patrick Sung, who's coming in just another month or two. These are world-class, superb people who now want to come to San Antonio, Texas, and lead this institution into the very top ranks of academic medical centers. So I think the platform we have established is at a level that attracts them.
Great. Dr. Figueroa.
So, Bill, you did ask the question about, you don't know how you could repay, Ken Shine or myself back for, being so understanding.
Uh-oh.
It's a gift I can never repay, Cisco.
No, my answer to you is that you have paid back in abundance by, being, one of the most exemplary leaders of any comprehensive academic health center, to be our leader here at the Health Science Center, to be an inspiration to us all.
Are we about out of time?
Yeah, I think so. Oh my goodness, can we give a standing ovation?
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was remarkable. It was emotional. Thanks a lot for not warning me to wear waterproof mascara. Hilarious and inspirational. So once again, a round of applause. Thank you so much, Dr. Henrich, for sharing that story. If you went for one of the raffle prizes, guess what I have right here in my hot little hand, everybody? I have the winners. So here they are. And here's the thing. If you left and you're not here, I get to keep them. Not really, but I always say that. Sporting good time package. Shoes. Shoes? That's all it says. Whose shoes? You're lucky. Oh, by the way, you can pick these up in the foyer after this. All right, the Sparkles package. Luis Belden? You get the Sparkle. The Arts and Entertainment package. I think it's Judy Ezra. All right, I'm agreeing. This side is not getting enough. It's all coming on this side. All right, maybe this one. And this is the best one, which we save for last. The wine package. Fabulous. All right, it's Barbara Anderson. Yes? Once again, you can pick those up as soon as this is over out there in the foyer. One of my favorite sayings, which, Dr. Henrich, when you said loving life to the nanosecond, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, today is a gift. That's why we call it the present. And this is a reminder that every day we need to unwrap that gift and celebrate it. Thank you for being here. See you again next year, everybody. Make it a great day.